Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 137 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike, and that is Gavin and Fia. Wait! No Fia today.
No Fia today. No, she is off doing wonderful grad school things. I believe she said she's doing field work and maybe doing some data analysis today, which is never the fun part of doing research. That's always the worst part, actually.
That sounds like someone's idea of a good time.
Honestly, there's many memes about how getting your data is always the fun part. It's when you have to get back to the lab and actually do stuff with it. That's the hard part of science.
Yeah, so no Fia today. We will miss her, but the podcast continues on. Gavin, how you been?
I've been good. I've been real tired. My father-in-law was visiting us when we recorded the last episode of the podcast. He was here, helping us fix up some stuff around the house. And we're nearly done with the project we were working on. He left, almost a week ago at the time this episode goes out. But so we fixed up a lot of our kitchen, put up new drywall on the walls, new flooring, painted all the kitchen cabinets, etc. So now we just need to finish up the drywall, which is a whole process. So that's what I've been dealing
Joys
with.
of being a homeowner.
Yeah. These are the things they don't tell you. So it's like, you want to own your own home. And don't get me wrong. I love the fact that I give money to a bank to own my house for me for 30 years. Instead of just giving money to a landlord. But, there are downsides. Yeah, how are you doing? How are you feeling in your post-war time?
Yeah, worse in many ways. Get these fun new headaches that are just all-consuming. It's not a good time.
Yeah, I bet.
Good news, the doctor gave me some drugs that actually help take care of that. So,
good.
In general, worse, but I'm hoping things are looking up pretty soon.
Good. Yeah, I don't
know how we transition from that, but
yeah, I didn't really know they had concussion medicine, or is it just general headache stuff?
Yeah, this is just you're getting severe headaches. Let's take care of that. Doc was pretty clear that it's pretty much just symptom management at this point.
Gotcha.
Cool. Which I'm happy to manage the symptoms as long as they need to be managed.
Absolutely. If it helps, it helps. So.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so you want to get to some housekeeping stuff with us, Gavin?
Do not forget to rate the show on whatever platform you listen to us on, and make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, etc. Make sure to give us feedback about the show. Those are the best direct ways to do that, especially in things like YouTube comments and stuff, because I do check those, every time that I upload an episode. And that's a great way to also suggest any future topics that you'd like to hear about on the podcast. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, which, spoilers, that's what our next episode, and sort of episode and a half, are going to be.
This is news to me. Okay.
Yeah. So if you would like to be a guest in the future, make sure to fill out our guest form down below in the show notes, as well as, I believe, a topic request form. And that's for our next episode. Like I said, spoilers. We're going to be talking to one of my friends who works at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science about a cool project that he's involved with regarding some fossils from Madagascar and how to do paleontology in foreign countries ethically. So we're going to be doing a two-parter, one about the project itself, and then one about some cool, museum side things, like different techniques that they're sort of cooking up for keeping better, track of their fossils and taking care of their fossils better. So I believe how I have it scheduled in my brain, there's going to be one episode in 2 weeks as normal, and then an episode the following week. So it's going to be a 138 part 1 and 138 part 2.
Are we allowed to do that?
I don't see why not.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we did a part A, letter B, something like that.
Was it the blah 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 years in 1 hour that wound up being 2 hours?
There was that one, and then also when Fia joined the podcast, we did hey, who is this person? Just like us kind of talking to Fia as a part.
Can we do another one of those? Just who is Fia? Because I feel like that's a story that deserves to be told more.
I agree. We'll run it by her.
We can do that. All right, you ready for Today in History?
Absolutely.
All right, so there's a couple things that I could go from today. I'm only going to go with one, even though there was a couple of really cool things that came out. But Gavin, What are some of the best sequels of all time?
Best sequels of all time. Well, obligatory mention of Shrek 2.
Shrek 2 on this day in
Really?
2004
Oh,
was
man.
released. Yes. I had a feeling that it was going to be one of the first things you said.
Oh,
which is
for
why I was
sure.
confident leading with
How
that.
can it not be?
So yes. Yeah, on today in 2004, premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. And I mean, like, Shrek 1 or Shrek 2, I mean, you take your pick with either one of those.
Oh, yeah, you can't go wrong.
I mean, it's an incredible story just start to finish.
Oh, yeah. So my next guess was going to be Spider-Man 2, the Tobey Maguire ones.
Yep, okay.
Because the one with Doc Ock is terrific.
Is that the one with Garfield?
No.
Like Andrew okay.
No, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man.
That's what I'm saying. Like the Andrew Garfield ones were the horrific ones, right?
The first one was all right. The second one was actively bad.
Okay.
Like it had good moments, but yeah, was not great. I think they redeemed him quite a lot in the more recent Spider-Man No Way Home, where there was all three of them.
Yes, I enjoyed that a lot.
That was an excellent movie. Anywho, Shrek 2, banger. Love that movie.
Mm-hmm. The soundtrack, everything, the end, the ball. Just if you haven't seen Shrek 2, I'm not really sure what you're doing listening to this podcast. You don't need us to tell you, but
also just the fact that like both of I honestly don't really know where I was going with that. I had a thought and then it escaped me. Oh, here it is. This is all staying in.
No cuts. We do it live.
Nope. So we have had a very large variety of things on Today in History, including like assassinations of presidents.
That was almost one of them. We had an assassination attempt was one of the options for today.
Was it Reagan?
No, it was King George III in 1800.
Oh. But yeah, so we've done assassinations of presidents. We've done very serious political things that have happened, and then just Shrek 2. And
Just
that's
when Gavin said we've.
Yeah, go ahead.
When Gavin says we've done assassinations of presidents,
Yeah,
he's referring to referencing them on the show, not that we have actually done assassinations of presidents. Although, like,
for legal reasons,
one or two.
Yes.
Yeah, right. I'm sure there's one or two throughout history that, like, I would have been okay with.
Jeez.
Like if I'm looking at Andrew Johnson, taking away black people's rights in the 1860s after the Civil War, and someone's like, you have an opportunity to change, like, I might take that chance. I might take that shot. For legal reasons, I wouldn't.
For legal reasons, we won't. But.
Right. All right. Do you have science stuff to talk about?
I do have science stuff to talk about. So, yeah, today we are talking about hawks and eagles. Formerly, the Accipitridae. That's a weird word. It doesn't sound nice in the mouth. Doesn't feel nice. So even though there are lots of other birds included in this group, I'm for the most part going to be just calling it hawks and eagles because those are the most sort of recognizable to most people.
And in case you're like me at home, when Gavin first told me what we were learning about today, I heard hogs and eagles, as in like pigs and eagles, but we're talking about hawks, Hawks.
Yes, like, the birds.
Like Atlanta. Yeah.
Yep. So this family has 70 genera and 255 species. So all things considered for birds, not a huge family, but is the largest family of like mostly carnivorous birds. So if you think of like owls or falcons, which are neither of which are particularly closely related to hawks and eagles, those are smaller than this family. But so this family includes obviously hawks, eagles, but also kites, like the things on a string, buzzards, which is kind of just another colloquial name that different parts of the world call things like hawks, and old world vultures. Very notably, not New World vultures. So things like turkey vultures and condors are not in this family. They are not related to the vultures in Africa and Asia. Also very notably, like I mentioned, lots of other carnivorous birds exist, like owls, ospreys, falcons. Those are all... Ospreys are very close, but they're not in this family. And And then falcons often just kind of get lumped in, because especially here in North America, those are kind of the three very notable ones, is hawks, eagles, and falcons. Falcons are not related to really all that closely at all. But yeah, so the generally bigger carnivorous birds that are not owls or New World vultures. That being said, even though the vultures in this family are only found in the Old World, stay tuned for more on that later, the family in general can be found all over the world except for Antarctica, even though they probably lived there at some point when Antarctica was more north than it is now. We'll talk a little bit more about that.
Wasn't anything that we think of Antarctica is.
Yeah. But, yeah, so we've never found fossils from there because, you know, it's Antarctica, and at the end of the day, these are birds, and birds do not leave good fossils, generally. But there's no reason to believe they weren't there when Antarctica was habitable. But they don't live there now. But pretty much everywhere else, even some pretty outlying islands, like, I know us here in North America often think of Australia and New Zealand hand in hand. New Zealand is very far from Australia.
They also like wildly just like be like, please, we're not Australia. Stop saying we're the same.
But you know, here in this part of the world, it's like, oh, this is, you know, places in the south part of the Pacific Ocean. They're basically neighbors, and it's like it is a substantial plane ride to get from one to the other. But yeah, so even places like as remote as New Zealand have a very long fossil record of hawks and eagles. But these birds are very iconic for a lot of reasons, mainly because they're some of the largest flying birds, but also they're just very recognizable, mostly by their wing shape. Hawks and eagles differ from pretty much all other birds in just sort of like the outline of their wing. If you see a bird, a couple exceptions, especially here in North America, because the New World vultures also have this, but it's separate. When they're flying, it looks like they have like fingers coming off their wings. They have these feathers that are really long and spread out on the ends of their wing. That's to help them with soaring, so they don't have to flap all that often. If you watch like an eagle fly versus watching a duck fly, ducks and geese are like very flappy. They flap their wings really fast and don't, you know, go full strokes all the way up and down unless they're taking off or landing. What?
Full strokes all the way up and down.
Oh, jeez. But hawks and eagles, their whole goal, especially things like sea eagles, bald eagles, all of the vultures, their goal is to flap as little as possible and to stay in the air for as long as possible between flaps.
Is that to preserve energy?
Yeah. And so in order to do that, that's what those sort of finger-like wings, feathers at the end of their wing are for. Just extra surface area to help them get more lift, to keep them in the air as long as possible. And you can see this like to a little extent in some other birds like owls. I even had to look up like like stock photos of owls to be like, do owls have this? And they do a little bit. But if you look up in the sky and you see a bird with fingers coming out of the end of its wings, it is probably a hawk or an eagle.
How big are these fingers that come out of the end of their wings?
So they're not literal fingers. There's no bones.
Right.
These are just extra long feathers.
Finger-looking things, but how long are they?
It depends a lot on the bird, but you know, in something big like one of the big vultures or a big eagle, they can be, you know, close to a foot long. These are they're flight feathers, especially like I'm trying to remember back to, you know, my like intro biology learning about birds. I think they're the primary flight feathers. They're the really long ones that point backwards. But those are what do sort of the bulk of like the weight carrying while they're flying.
Really? Okay.
Yep. So that's one of the main things, how you very easily recognize a hawk or an eagle or any of their other relatives in flight. But let's talk about some of their features a little bit more in depth. And everyone, especially here in America, You know when I say eagle, there's really one that you're thinking of.
Of course.
And so I will be referencing the bald eagle quite a lot.
Hell yeah. I think every time you say bald eagle, I should just say hell yeah.
Okay.
Like I feel like that should just be the bit that we do for the show. It's going to get annoying as all hell, but
it will.
I think I might commit to it.
Sure, buddy. Yes. So, in general, this family, because like I said, it's not just hawks and eagles. There's all those other little things. They range in size quite a lot, and in terms of size, this is one of the most diverse families of birds. They range in size from there's a couple that are sort of the smallest. It's the tiny pearl kite and the little sparrow hawk. Each are about 9 inches
the actual
long.
Names?
What was that?
Like, are tiny and little actually part of the names of those birds? Incredible.
Super side tangent. If you ever want to have a good time and you want to go down a weird Wikipedia hole, just look up common names for birds. They're ridiculous.
This is definitely one definition of a good time, but okay.
Yep, that's my definition. And some of the common names for birds are just like genuinely really insulting to the bird. So if you have like half an hour, just Google funny common names for birds. Do with that what you will. But yes, so these two species, each are about 9 inches long, have a 15 or so inch wingspan, and only weigh about 3 ounces. So really tiny little birds. All the way up to some of the largest flying birds. These are pretty much all the old world vultures. Like the Cinereous vulture, which is a scarily large bird. Birds should not be this big unless they can't fly. It is just under 4 feet in length. So if it were standing on the ground, it would be give or take 4 feet tall. That is too tall. About 30 pounds.
That's intimidating. And
a wingspan of about 10 feet. A very large bird. Generally, these birds are sexually dimorphic, meaning that one sex is shaped differently than the other. Typically, this is referring to size. Especially in mammals, we think of it mostly for size, with males generally being larger. With birds, it gets a lot more complicated, though, because birds are very notable for the males being very brightly colored and stuff like that. We'll talk about their feathers a bit more here in a little bit. But in this case, we are still talking about size like in mammals, but it's kind of reversed. Females are typically bigger in this family than the males are, which is not typically the case for birds.
So is sexual dimorphism just like any physical, like if there's any physical difference between male and female members of a species?
Like, I'm sure like that really there is like some form of a threshold to it. Right. But generally, yeah.
Okay. That seems like almost every species of animal would fall into that.
You'd be surprised.
Really?
Okay. So mostly it's not really referring to like organs, like internal organs. That's just kind of a given between male and female.
Right. Like, yeah. Like physical, like outward presenting, like. So like aren't there differences in most animals?
It depends. So if you think of, for example, like house cats, there's really not that much of a difference between males and females.
I mean, isn't there like one in particular difference? Like, are we not counting genitalia?
No.
Okay.
Again, like I said, organs, that's just kind of a given.
Gotcha. Okay.
This is mostly referring to like things like deer antlers, where it's like the females, for the most part, there are some species of deer where the females also grow antlers. But for like deer antlers, cow horns, stuff like that, that is like visible and also size. Kind of is just kind of tacked on there because that's one of the most common ways of sexual dimorphism.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, and so this is one of the first cases of this family being weird for birds. Like I said, typically when there's size-based sexual dimorphism in birds, the male is typically larger. This family is the opposite. The females are bigger, and that is like they're not the only group of birds where this is the case, but it's not very common in different bird groups. It is kind of the more common case in a lot of reptiles, though. Of which, as I always like to remind people when we do an episode about birds, birds are reptiles. So like snakes, it is very, very uncommon for a male, for a species of snake where the males are even close to the same size as the females. Females are almost always quite a bit larger. Lizards, it's a little bit different. And then crocodilians, the males are considerably bigger. A lot of it depends on how much the males fight each other for females. But yeah, anyway, in this case, that's probably why the males are a bit bigger, because they sometimes do compete against one another for females.
Mm-hmm.
Another case of them being weird compared to other birds is some weird genetic stuff that they have going on. And I want to preface this with, I am not a geneticist. Funnily enough, I took genetics twice. Not because I failed, but because it didn't transfer right.
I was about to say why. Okay.
So I took it at my community college, and it wouldn't transfer to my 4-year school as the class that I needed for my major because it didn't have a lab. So I had to take genetics with a lab. So I took genetics twice. Funnily enough, though, I still don't like it. So I also wasn't particularly good at cellular biology either. So bear with me here. Basically, chromosomes can come in different sizes. For convenience, we'll stick with macrochromosomes and microchromosomes, big and little. Pretty much all other birds have few big chromosomes and then lots of littles. Birds of prey, so it's in this case, it's not just this family. I believe owls do this as well, and ospreys. But they have very few littles and then several medium to big ones. So they sort of reverse it compared to pretty much all other birds. Why? You got me. No one kind of seems to know. There are hypotheses, but like I said, being the very much non-geneticist that I am, they were quite a bit over my head.
This very much kind of falls into the thing of, like, sometimes evolution just kind of is, like, there might not be a reason for something.
Right.
Or at least not a super obvious one.
Right. What's weird is that they all seem to have, like, a fairly normal number of chromosomes compared to other birds. So, like, there are some cases where just, like, one random one-off animal has, like, a ton of extra chromosomes for some reason that didn't result in it dying way back in its evolutionary history. Like hagfish are like this. They have like easily like more than double the number of chromosomes of their closest relatives. No idea why. But that doesn't seem to be the case here, where it's like they seem to have a normal-ish amount, but they're just kind of arranged weirdly. Thought that was just a neat thing that I would have never considered before, and I'm now going to be done talking about genetics.
That was a quick little deep dive, but we'll take it.
As I mentioned before, I talked about some of their feathers and their coloring. If you've looked at hawks and eagles and stuff, generally they're not very colorful. There's lots of browns, lots of blacks and whites and stuff, but none of the flashy colors like peacock colors or even like cardinal red colors. Not really any of that. The brightest that they get are, I guess, the most different that they get from like just browns, blacks, and whites is their beaks and feet tend to be somewhat different colors. Like think of, again, a bald eagle.
Hell yeah.
Thank you. How their feet are that very striking and their beak are that really bright yellow. But as for feathers, it's pretty much just the earth tones and white.
Which is striking in its own way, but not in the same kind of way.
Exactly. And so, again, thinking of a bald eagle.
Hell yeah.
They're very striking because of contrast. They have, and that's a big thing that a lot of these...
that's a good way to think about it, yeah.
Yeah. So the bald eagle, their body is generally pretty dark brown. When they're younger, it's a little lighter brown. But then their head and tail are like this very bright bleach white. And that's the case of a good handful of different hawks and eagles is that a lot of them have like a very light brown to almost like eggshell kind of color, like chest and head, and then their wings and tail feathers will be like a darker brown, stuff like that. And then, again, going back to this sexual dimorphism, in terms of feathers, not really the case in pretty much any hawks or eagles. They do have lots of different, like, the males have lots of different mating displays and do some, like, fancy flying and things like that to impress females, but they don't do things with color like a lot of other birds do. They have really sharply curved beaks, mostly for ripping flesh, which is mainly how they eat.
Awesome.
Unlike things like owls, for comparison. Owls crush their prey in their talons. They just have a really strong grip, and they'll just literally crush the mouse into a little mouse burrito, and then just swallow the mouse whole. These guys, I'm sure, can do that if it's a small enough prey item, but that's typically not how they eat. They tend to go for things that are big enough relative to them that they have to sort of rip off pieces. Some of them even have like a little notch in their beak that sort of acts like a tooth that they use to basically sever the neck of small rodents and snakes and things that they eat. And speaking
Sever the necks.
Yeah. Where they just like...
That's incredible.
Yeah, they just... And just snap its neck. Not like break its neck, but like cut its neck in half. Wow. Birds are so metal.
I was gonna say, that's hardcore.
Yeah. And this is not at all an uncommon thing for birds. But yeah, birds are very intense the more you learn about them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, speaking of things that they eat a variety of diets, although almost all of them, I can only think of like one or two that I read about that don't eat other animals of some kind. But within being carnivores, they're very diverse. Pretty much all of them can eat just about anything, from snakes to mice to fish, to even like carrion, roadkill basically. But many specialize in some kind of prey, mostly vertebrate prey. So some, like the genus that the family is named after, Accipiter, which is most of your hawks, especially in the Old World, but there are some species here in North and South America too. They specialize in hunting other birds. So they are very fancy flyers that can fly in between trees very, very quickly and can catch other birds like while flying. That's their main thing. Some, like bald eagles.
Hell yeah.
Specialize in fish and have, special adaptations for their wings repel water better. Their talons are much more like fish hooks to be able to, pierce the fish and not let it go. Their eyes even have some adaptations to cut through the glare on the water, like polarized sunglasses kind of do. A few of the smaller species eat snails. Like that's their specialty, is snails for some reason. Well, lots of the really small ones eat insects. Then there's the vultures, who specialize in eating carrion, dead stuff. Although there is one species of vulture, the palm nut vulture, which specializes in fruit. Sure.
Really?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, it says that typically that makes up about half their diet is fruit. So they're more omnivorous than purely herbivorous. They'll still eat like dead fish and stuff. They live along I think the east coast of Africa typically. So they'll still eat like dead fish and stuff that wash up on the beach. But they like their fruit.
Sure.
And on top of all of that, some of the largest, mostly non-vultures, vultures will eat live stuff if they get the chance, but they don't really go out of their way for it. But some of the largest non-vultures, things like martial eagles, golden eagles, wedge-tailed eagles, a lot of the eagles, they'll eat and rarely kill deer, antelope, kangaroos.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Jeez.
Not necessarily.
It's just scary that must be. Like
not necessarily full-grown ones.
Okay, you get little toddler deer. just going around looking for its mom, and Bambi's trying to figure out what's going on.
Oh,
and then all of a sudden, just like an eagle from the sky, like a predator drone, comes down and attacks you.
Yeah, so golden eagles have been known to be able to carry things heavier than themselves, and they are a big bird. So they can
it should be possible.
Easily carry off like a newborn deer, brand newborn, or at least very easily kill it. I don't know how well they'd be able to carry off a newborn deer, but you get my point. So that's not uncommon. In fact, I didn't read anything about this for this episode, but I've heard that there were very large eagle species that lived in Eastern Africa a few million years ago, while humans were running around, like early humans and our ancestors.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Like most predators, these hawks and eagles generally have pretty good senses. However, their vision is just in a whole other league compared to almost anything else. Birds in general have very good vision, typically better than most mammals, especially in terms of color vision. That's just kind of a general rule, is that reptiles writ large have a broader spectrum of perceivable color than most mammals. Humans are kind of the exception, humans and some other primates. We have probably the best color vision for mammals, but so we're as bad as you think your vision is, you're probably up there with the best of all the mammals. Even with that, I read somewhere, and I didn't believe this at first because it sounded too low. It said at least that their visual acuity is at least twice as good as humans, and I'm like, that seems small.
Also, how do you figure that out?
Like how I didn't really go into their methodologies all that much. I think it's like I'm sure and this is me spitballing here, like identifying prey from certain distances, basically.
Sure.
That's how I would assume they would do it. I mean, certain birds are quite trainable. So I'm sure that they did work out some kind of way to test this in like a repeatable manner.
Right. Okay.
But other things that I read basically said somewhere between 4 and 8 times. Which that sounds more accurate, just because everything my entire life I've heard, and maybe this is just confirmation bias, but everything my entire life has been like, yeah, hawks and eagles have vision 1,000 times as good as a person, which that's a bit much, but I'd say 4 to 8 times right, sounds about right. And surprisingly, you'd think, well, if their vision is that great, their other senses must be pretty bad, and that's not really true at all. Their hearing is quite good, surprisingly. But their sense of smell isn't very good. Even the vultures find food mostly by sight. New World vultures, which again are not related to this group, at least not very closely. Things like turkey vultures and condors, they have very good smell, and that's how they find their food.
I believe that almost more than the sight thing.
Yeah. And so it honestly just makes it even more impressive that they're able to be scavengers purely based on sight and not smell.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, a little bit more about their eyes. If you've ever been to like a wildlife show or a zoo or anything and seen a big eagle or something look at you and it just looks really intense, that's because they literally can't move their eyes.
Do they have to move their head?
They have to move their whole head. They can move their eyes like a tiny bit. But if they want to look at something, they basically have to be facing directly at it, which is why it kind of looks really unnerving when they look at you.
Mm-hmm.
But their eyes are kind of tube-shaped, which is what lets them have such good vision, but also it's not, a sphere, which is why they can't really move it. moving on to some more stuff. Very well known in bald eagles. Bald eagles, Mike.
Oh, hell yeah.
So really well known in them, but also applies to lots of others as well. But they typically mate for life and are very devoted parents in raising their chicks. Again, being devoted parents, not uncommon for birds. Mating for life is not unheard of, but not particularly common in birds. But that's
what happens in that situation where if one of the birds dies or in some other way just captured, caught, whatever, like is out of the picture?
Yeah, they'll go find another mate if they're confident their other one's not coming back.
Gotcha.
But for the most part, they mate for at least several breeding seasons, if not for life. In fact, bald eagles,
hell yeah,
have like a very intricate sort of mating or like courtship dance in the air, very famously. And year round, but especially in the weeks sort of right before the breeding season, they are incredibly territorial because they're like, hey, I'm about to lay some eggs. I need my range to be able to give me my food. Anybody else besides me and my wife, get out of here. Especially for, members of their own species, but also, other birds of prey as well. Also, again, I mean, and maybe I'm saying very famously because there was a zoo very close to me where I grew up where they had lots of these animals. Like we had eagles, we had lots of hawks, we had a makeshift, I'm sure it wasn't real, but a very large eagle nest. A lot of these birds are known, especially the big eagles, known for building enormous nests.
Like how big is enormous?
So, depends obviously on the size of the bird. But for some of the big eagles, they can easily get to like 4 feet across.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, for 2 birds and then some eggs. 4 feet.
That's like a mansion. That's bird mansion right there.
Yeah. The largest tree nest, so like up off the ground, ever found belonged to a bald eagle. A bald eagle.
Hell yeah.
Thank you.
I'm still thinking about the nest.
Oh, I'm getting there.
4 feet.
So yes, the largest nest ever belonged to a bald eagle.
Hell yeah.
And was over 20 feet deep, over 9 feet across, and weighed almost 3 tons.
How is this possible?
Because they lived there for a really long time.
And how many birds lived in this, like New York City apartment?
As far as I know, with them being so territorial, it would be the same pair. Maybe one of them died and brought in another one. Or maybe, both of them died one really harsh winter. Because if it's that big, and with it being bald eagles, I assume it's Alaska.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So maybe it was just a really bad winter one year. Both of them died, and then a pair of new eagles moved in. That's not uncommon either. They do typically build their own nest each year or go back to the same one. But sometimes they do. If they find like a good one, they'll take that one. Yeah.
Gotcha.
In
That's
fact,
cool. They go back to the same nest every year, though.
Yeah. In fact,
I guess it makes sense, but just it's cool.
Yeah. But a lot of the other predatory birds do not build their own nests. So like owls almost never build their own nests. They'll steal nests from hawks and eagles.
That seems like a real dangerous move.
I mean, like I said, there's lots of relatively small. In fact, most of them are relatively small. So if you're a pretty good size, like a great horned owl or something, yeah, you can probably bully a hawk out of its nest. When they actually breed, they have pretty small clutches of like 4 to 6 eggs. So not like huge, like, constantly laying eggs like a chicken or anything. But there is a lot of competition between the siblings. And siblings killing each other and kicking each other out of the nest is not at all uncommon. So they lay 4 to 6 eggs. The number of those that actually make it to adulthood or even make it out of the nest to begin with is maybe 1 or 2. Unlike many other birds, famously, birds feed their chicks by puking into their mouths.
Is it puking? Or is it just like chewed up food?
So birds have a special organ in their esophagus called a crop. And so it's not like when they regurgitate food for their chicks, it's not from their stomach, it's from the crop. It's basically just like a little storage compartment on the way to the stomach. And lots of birds that like eat seeds and stuff will also swallow small stones that hang out in the crop and grind up the seeds. That's a very common thing. But yeah, so hawks and eagles for the most part don't do this. They will bring a whole squirrel or rabbit or whatever back to their nest and like peel off little strips of meat and feed those to their chicks. The exception being vultures, because they typically don't hunt, so they can't bring back a whole zebra. If they're in the African savannah, they can't carry a whole zebra back to their nest. So they feed their young by regurgitating. So that's all some stuff about modern hawks and eagles and vultures and kites and some of their relatives. But
are we going back in time?
We're going back in time.
Or are we going to the future? Can we go to the future?
Probably. Honestly, I'll talk a little bit about eagle conservation and stuff here for a sec. And this, I don't have this in my notes. This is going to be kind of off the dome. There are lots
off your beautiful shiny dome.
Oh, thank you. Super side note. When we were several months ago, my parents came to visit, and Liz loves going to thrift stores. She took them to one of her thrift stores, and they found a mug that says "Bald and Beautiful." and bought that.
I can only think of Bold and Brash when I hear that.
Oh, SpongeBob. But yes, so I have a mug that says "Bald and Beautiful." But yes, so again, this is mostly off the dome. In general, most of the big birds are doing not great, but better than they used to be.
Okay.
With the exception being vultures. Vultures are doing generally pretty bad.
Okay.
Mostly because they rely on big things dying, and we kill all of the big things.
Okay.
But for example, bald eagles. Mike, that's
hell yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, they were doing terribly in like the late 80s into the 90s because of a chemical called DDT. It was used as an insecticide, very, very efficient insecticide. Was great at keeping down the bugs, but it messed with a lot of birds' ability to the thickness of their eggshells. So it didn't really affect them all that much, but it made it so their eggshells were a lot thinner.
Right, you're just thinning out like the next herd.
Right. So when they would even just sit on their eggs to incubate them, the eggs would just break. And that happened for several generations worth of eagles. And the reason it affected bald eagles and other fish eating other fish eating birds so badly is because when it would rain, all of that DDT would flow into the rivers and get into the fish. We've since.
So is the fact that these animals are doing better now, does it mean that conservation efforts are working?
Yeah, DDT got banned for at least in the U.S. and in lots of other countries. There's still a handful that use it, but that was basically it. Bald eagles are now doing, all things considered, fairly well.
Hell yeah. And hell yeah.
Yeah. So especially in Alaska, they're like crows over there. They're everywhere.
Really?
Even here, just in central Pennsylvania, I see them. I live along a river, so then they eat fish. That's where they like to hang out. I see them at least every other week. A bald eagle just flying over the road or something. Yeah. So they're doing quite well. Again, lots of the other bigger birds, not as well. Especially there's a handful of Amazon rainforest specific eagles. There's a one called the Harpy eagle, one of the biggest eagles. But it's adapted especially for living in dense forests, and we're real good at getting rid of dense forests to make room for our cows. So
it's funny because it's sad.
Yeah. So again, in general, typical conservation stuff, but other than vultures, they're all doing more or less all right. Again, vultures generally doing real bad. Anywho, let's talk about the future of this group. Let's talk about the past.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about their fossil record here. So for birds, this group has a surprisingly decent fossil record, but at the end of the day, they are still birds, which do not tend to fossilize all that well, so not a stellar.
And can you go over why that is again? I know we've talked about this before, but just why don't birds fossilize particularly well?
Mostly because their bones are very fragile. Mm-hmm. So they, contrary to popular belief, they do not have, like, air sacs in their bones, at least most of their bones. So, like, their hand bones don't have, like, air in them. Or they're not hollow. That's what it is. So their bones are not hollow. They basically, so if you think of like your bone, how it's like the thick outer layer, and then there's sort of like a spongy marrow on the inside. That's how like mammal bones are laid out. Mm-hmm. Basically, they take this marrow layer, and instead of having just like a sort of like spongy inner core, they basically turn that into like little struts running through the inside of the bone. So there are gaps, but it's not like empty in those gaps. They do have like some air sacs in certain bones, especially like around the skull and in some of like the arm bone and stuff. That helps with their breathing. Bird breathing is kind of ridiculous, but yeah, so bird bones aren't hollow. They're just oriented in very different ways that makes them more fragile, like to the certain kinds of stresses that would make them fossilize less well.
Gotcha. Okay. So we still have some for hawks and eagles. We still have some
right.
Decent fossil record, at least comparatively.
Right, and that's because all things considered, they are some of the larger birds, which definitely helps. You know, bigger bones means like, you know, if you've ever found like a you know, small bird skeleton like on the beach or something, like you like look at it and it turns to dust. Whereas these bones are a little more robust than that.
Gotcha.
So the earliest fossils from this family they're not like for sure members of this family. They're not decent enough to even like be given like a genus or a species, but they're identifiable mostly because they're leg bones. Birds, one of the best ways to identify bird fossils are from their leg bones. Birds tend to have very different feet and legs from one another. But so the earliest ones that we can say, okay, this is for sure on this hawk eagle branch, are from about 50 million years ago or so. And so that's about 16 million years after the dinosaurs go extinct, and over 100 million years since the very first birds. I was like just throwing that out, since it's often sort of phrased as dinosaurs turned into birds. So exactly. A lot of people mistakenly think that birds didn't come around until the dinosaurs went extinct. But no, birds have been around they coexisted with dinosaurs for like over 100 million years. But yeah, so all things considered, after the dinosaurs went extinct, and the pterosaurs, also importantly, the flying reptiles that were around at the same time as the dinosaurs, after they went extinct, about 16 million years after that is when we see the very first hawks and eagles. Like I said, all of these are pretty fragmentary, though, so they don't have really good scientific names given to them. We just can tell this is a hawk-eagle relative. We start getting pretty complete specimens in the late Eocene epoch, around 35 million years ago. And as per usual, the more we get closer, the closer we get to recent times, the more common the fossils get. That's just kind of how the fossil record works, because there's been less time for them to have been destroyed, or less time for them to like be on rocks that fall off the mountain and break and stuff. So the closer to the recent, the better the fossils and more common the fossils typically. Unfortunately, by the time we get good quality fossils from this group, they mostly just look like hawks and eagles. So it doesn't really tell us much about their evolution. One of the oldest species that I was able to find like good information about is called Aviraptor longicruce. It's a fun name.
It's an incredibly fun name.
Yeah. From the early Oligocene, so about 30 million years ago. And like I said, by all accounts, appears to be very similar to modern groups with like ever so slightly longer legs. That's what the longicruce means. Unfortunately, their closest relatives, so like groups that are not hawks and eagles but are close, they also don't have great fossil records, like early fossil records. So things like ospreys, secretary birds, New World vultures, they also don't have a terrific early fossil record. So as for their early evolution, we don't really have much. But, as per usual, there are a couple of species here that I thought were worth singling out. So the first one is called Apatosagittarius, which again is just very fun.
It just, that sounds good coming out of the mouth.
It sure does. So that's from the late Miocene of Nebraska, so around 8 to 9 million years ago or so. Very similar to a secretary bird. So if you're not familiar, imagine like a moderately sized hawk or small eagle, and then just give it real long legs. In secretary birds, it's thought that they have these really long legs because a large part of their diet is snakes. And secretary birds live in a part of the world where there sure are a lot of venomous snakes. And they primarily hunt them by stomping on them.
Really?
Yep. They try and just crush their little skulls. And so a couple of things. Long legs, number one.
That seems inefficient, but okay.
Well, you'd be surprised.
Okay.
So long legs equals more force. You just have more leverage to put into your stomp. But arguably, from my just like quick, thinking about it, reading a little bit about it, more importantly, it also makes it so your body doesn't have to get that close to the snake. If you're hunting potentially venomous, deadly snakes, they're a lot less likely to hit your skinny little bird legs than they are to hit your body if your body were to get close enough. So if you have these real long legs that you can sort of hang out just outside of their strike range, but you can still stomp them pretty well. That's good enough.
And so if you get like bit on the leg, is that just less bad than getting bit on your body?
I mean, no, but their legs have scales that are relatively tough.
Okay.
But their legs are just real skinny. So there's just less surface area to get bitten on.
Okay.
There's a smaller target for the snake, basically.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so that's hypothesized why secretary birds have these like absurdly long legs. Apatosagittarius is so basically a secretary bird. Secretary birds are not in this family. They're sort of like 2 steps away. But it's thought that this is why Apatosagittarius also had these real long legs, because it lived in the late Miocene, and that is when snakes really started popping off around the world, especially the sort of typical type of snake, your colubrid snakes. This is like your general garter snake, the larger group of like standard snakes, the not super crazy constrictors, not super crazy venomous ones. Although some of them are still venomous. But so may have been under some similar selective pressure here. Another one is Neophrontops. Another just good one to say. So this is an old world vulture from the late Pleistocene of Southern California. I'll say that again.
Wow.
An old world vulture from Southern California.
Okay. Do you want to explain that one for me?
Yeah. As it turns out, while the distinctions today between old world vultures and new world vultures, so like them being separate evolutionary groups is real. They are not very closely related. But us calling them old world and new world only fits today. They're not separate evolutionary groups because of where they live. They have lived in each other's places in the past. So it's just convenient that it happens to work out today where they live. Yeah.
Okay.
And this is why, going back to the very beginning, talking about common names for birds, common names, I understand why they exist, but man, can they be confusing sometimes.
You're not kidding?
Yeah. So, this was an old world vulture, and by no means was it a one-off bird, but lived in Southern California during the Pleistocene, probably fed on like mammoths and things like that would die. This is an extremely well-known species from the La Brea tar pits. There are hundreds of them there. And yes, we've had a whole episode about the La Brea tar pits quite a while ago. I don't remember off the top of my head what episode that was.
Yeah, that was an early one.
Yeah. That was when I was still in California. And lastly, the largest eagle ever, and one of the largest flying birds ever, is called Haast's eagle from the Pleistocene through the late Holocene of New Zealand. And late Holocene, as in went extinct once humans got to New Zealand.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was somewhere between 20 and 40 pounds in the females, with males being noticeably smaller, like mid-20s on the upper end. And for its size, it had a relatively short wingspan, sort of, like I mentioned earlier, harpy eagles. They have relatively short wings because they fly in forests and stuff. But that being said, it still had a wingspan of 8.5 to 10 feet. So this guy must have had to flap a lot to be 40 pounds and have wings that relatively short. And it was able to get that big because it ate other giant birds.
That's incredible.
Yep.
Okay.
So there was a giant flightless bird called the moa. We talked quite a lot about it in the episode we had about ratites, which are the group of flightless birds, including ostriches, emus, rheas in South America, and also moas in New Zealand. So these birds could be several hundred pounds. And basically just like, imagine just like a ostrich, but like real chunky. And that's primarily what these guys ate. And they went extinct because when humans got there, they also thought the moas looked tasty. And just historically, flightless birds on islands, when humans get there, do really badly. Because not only do humans want to eat them, but the things that humans bring with them, like rats or cats, or dogs even, like to eat them or their eggs. So, the fact that kiwis are still like around on New Zealand is kind of a miracle. But yeah, so very shortly after humans got to New Zealand and killed all their food, Haas eagles went extinct, only like a few hundred years ago. So that is, by and large, hawks and eagles. Not the most expansive episode, because they don't have...
But still a cool one.
Yeah, it's a really cool group of birds. And we don't talk about birds enough, I don't think. I think we've only had one other episode like about a group of birds, I think.
Do you like birds in general? Like, I know there's some animals you do and don't like. Like, are you a bird guy?
I like birds. I wish I'd like them better if they left better fossils. But so I will say,
said.
I do not like ostriches, and I think really? I talked about it in the episode we did there. Ostriches make me nervous, but
I mean, I remember going to Ostrich Land USA with you a couple of years ago.
Yep, when Mike came to visit me when I was living in California, we took him. There's an ostrich ranch. Not that far from where I was living, and we took Mike there, and he got to feed some ostriches.
I just remember getting or I got some of the notifications. That was 2 years ago, like last month, I think.
Yeah.
I was getting all the, this day, 2 years ago stuff. That was a good time. If you ever get a chance to go if you're in California, check it out.
It's I don't remember the exact town that it's in, but it's somewhere around Solvang, Buellton area on the central coast of California, a bit north of Santa Barbara.
And with that geography lesson at the end of the episode, this has been episode 137 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike. That was Gavin. We hope to have Fia back next week, and we'll see all of you guys for our next episode. Take care, everybody.
This episode of I Wish You Were Dead was written by Gavin Davidson and hosted by Gavin Davidson, Mike Bryson, and Fenella Campanino. It was sound edited and edited for YouTube by Gavin Davidson. Special thanks to former guests of the pod and to listeners like you.